Hello, and welcome to the Astrology Hub podcast. My name's Amanda Poole-Walsh, and I'm the founder of Astrology Hub and the host of this podcast. And today we're speaking to powerhouse astrologer Anne Ortelee, who says Astrology Hub is one of her favorite places online to send people for accurate information, so they're not sifting and sorting through a million different places looking for truth. I got to tell you guys, when Anne said this during the podcast recording, it was complete music to my ears. It's always been our intention from the very beginning to be your trusted source for high quality astrological information. So it made me so happy that someone with Anne's depth of experience as an astrologer would send her community our way. Wow. Okay, so during this episode, Anne tells me in her humorous, straightforward way that she got into astrology because, quote unquote, she got dumped. Her boyfriend of 14 years ran off with another woman whose birthday was just one day away from his. So in her words, he basically ran off with himself. I love that. In her devastation, her friends convinced her to go see an astrologer who could see that the breakup happened during a major Pluto transit for her. She could barely believe everything he could see about her, the relationship, and her whole new life that was coming. Shortly after, she found herself in his living room every Monday night for the next 2.5 years, taking his astrology class and wondering, why don't we learn this in school like math and science? I bet a lot of you have had that same question run through your head. So Anne and I get into the ins and outs of 2020. She's got quite a unique interpretation around the 2020 US presidential election that you may want to track. It follows the pattern of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction coming up, and she points to other times in history where we see this and how it impacted major political players like Reagan, Lincoln, Roosevelt, Kennedy, and heck, even John Lennon. Anne says this is a big time in the changing of leadership, and this will also trickle down into our own personal lives. The question we should all be asking is, what is our kingdom? What does it look like? Where are we going with it? While Anne shows that 2020 is going to introduce major changes politically, economically, and personally, she also shows us why a study of the great cycles can give us a sense of ease and calm amidst what could be considered upheaval. She also tells us why 2020 is going to be one of those years where it's like watching a movie star in the gym, preparing for the next big G.I. Joe movie. Working with a personal trainer who's going to kick our butts, but totally prepare us for the role we're meant to play. Anne will be giving a talk in the 2020 Astrology Forecast Marathon. And if you haven't registered free yet, you can go ahead and do that over at astrologyhub.com/2020forecast. Yes, registration is now open. Make sure you reserve your spot. As Anne says, informed always makes better choices. And that's what we're doing, bringing top astrologers together to get you prepared for this most interesting, exciting year of change. With that said, let's give Anne our full attention. She's got some incredible wisdom and insight to help you move through what's coming with grace. Anne Ortelee, it is so nice to be here with you today. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, thank you, Amanda. I love Astrology Hub. It's one of my favorite places on the internet.
Thank you. That's amazing.
Oh, you give out really good information, great content. People love it. It's like one of those places I can safely send people and say, want to learn about astrology? Go check out Astrology Hub. So you do a really good job. So
thank you. Wow, that's amazing. There's a lot of places to go on the internet so for you to say that's a big deal.
And a lot of the information on the internet is bad, and you always have really good astrologers. So I'm happy to be included in your podcast because there's a lot of bad astrology out there, and you always pick good astrologers. So that's good.
Thank you, Anne. All right. Well, we're honored to have you as well. And I don't know that we've ever had this conversation around how you came to astrology. Like, tell us your story.
I got dumped. It was Saturn across my ascendant, right? And which is traditional breakup or breakdown or breakthrough energy when it hits the angles. And my partner of 14.5 years met another woman and he ran off with her. She was literally born the day after he was. So he basically ran off with himself, right?
Oh my God.
I know, but 14.5 years. So all my friends were like, you need to go have an astrology reading. You need to go. And I'm like, what's an astrology? And they're like, no, when you're at a really big life transition, it's really helpful. And it was also a Pluto transit because there was a triangle involved, obviously. So I went to this astrologer in New York, who's a wonderful astrologer, named John Marcusella, and I had a reading at 11:30 on a Friday morning in June. And I go into the reading, and I start to cry, and I'm not a big crier. I mean, puppy movies make me cry, but basically, I'm kind of tough. And I start to cry, and he's like, well, yeah, you got a whole new life coming. You gave birth to yourself. You're being reborn. Like, you know what? I liked my last life. I don't want a new life. But we go along and we're talking, and he goes, I say, well, there was this guy. And he opens up the book and he goes, he's gone. And then he told me a lot of stuff about him. And he goes, didn't you break up with him 7 years ago? Which, of course, is Saturn. And I went, yeah. And he goes, you should have stayed broken up. And he's gone now. But you said you got a whole new life coming in the fall. You don't even know what it is. But he knew all this stuff about him. And he's looking at this book of numbers, the ephemeris. And I'm like, how is he looking at a book of numbers and knowing all this stuff about my personal relationship with this guy? And all I said, there was this guy. And I left the reading kind of blown away by all that he knew. Because, you meet somebody, you get a feel for him. But this guy is just looking at a book talking about somebody he doesn't know other than there was this guy. So I go away that weekend with the women who recommended me to him, who all went to him for readings. And I was talking about it. And they were like, let's listen to your videotape, your audio tape. I said, hell no. But they were like, I said, how does he do that? And one of them said, well, he teaches it. He teaches. She had studied with him. But she said, it's hard. So I kind of stopped. I just go to him and pay him for readings. But she was actually a pretty good astrologer. So I came home for the weekend on Monday and I called and said, how did you do that? I'd like to learn how you did that. Because, I'm a Virgo. We hate to make the same mistake twice. Or again, we're just cautious souls. So he said, well, I'm starting a beginner class in the fall. And of course, when you break up with your partner and you work with them, your whole life goes out the window. I didn't have anything to do at night. So he became one of my things that I went every Monday for 2.5 years and sat on his couch and learned astrology. And about 2 months in, I was like, why don't we learn this like math and reading in first grade? And a lot of people, when they come to astrology, come to it at a crossroads. It certainly was in my life. And sometimes it's a tool for healing, but then sometimes, like it was in my case, it became my new career. So 7 years later, I went full-time as an astrologer in 2001.
Amazing, Anne. Wow.
Yeah. So I have Pluto as the way I discovered astrology. So I tend to pull in people when they're having Pluto transits, which is their life is run into, the Lord of the Underworld, and what are they going to do about it? So.
Wow. Okay, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
So when you broke up with him the 7 years prior to the final, why did you get back together with him?
Well, when how like when you break up with somebody and then all your friends go, oh my God, I hated him. I hated him. I hated him.
Yes.
And I'm like, really? You all hated him? So, he's a Cancer, they kind of slur you back in again. And no offense to Cancers. I love Cancers. My South Node is in Cancer. He was born on my prenatal eclipse, literally. And he just rode back in again. And so when he came back in, the bad part, Amanda, was I didn't tell anybody, right? So then 7 years later.
Because everybody had already told you that they hated him and they didn't like you together.
Yeah. Everybody hated him. I didn't say anything to anybody. So then 7 years later, when we broke up again and I'm rolling around on the floor, they're all like, I thought we got rid of this guy 7 years ago. And I'm like, well, no. He came back in.
Whoa, you kept it secret for 7 years.
Oh, I have a lot of Scorpio in my chart. Of course I kept it secret for 7 years. Yeah. So, it was kind of like, it's not hard to do. I live in New York. You can kind of, divide your life into pockets. And he's a Cancer, so he was very compartmentalized too.
Wow.
But at any rate, it was definitely, when they all came out as hating him, I thought, well, I really can't, especially because I was rolling around that year too. And, I think if I'd said I went back with him, they would have all killed me, which they did 7 years later when we broke up again.
Oh my God.
Well, the moral of the story is don't lie to your friends.
Yes, you probably didn't get as much sympathy the second time around.
I did not. No, they were kind of like, what? And of course they were like, you've been back with him and we don't know about it. I'm like,
oh my gosh. Wow.
Got a lot of Scorpio in my chart. We only tell what you need. It's a need to know. I would have been a good CIA agent,
What was your career before?
I was in computer programming.
Wow. Computer programmer to astrologer.
Well, your astrology chart is your program for your soul.
Oh my God, I love that. Yes.
That's why I fell in love with it. And last year when I taught the pinball, it's really your computer programming, how it rolls, right? So I think, whole system, like how are you as a person going to handle this? So yeah, computer programming for the soul.
Well, and I love the story too, because I hope that it's giving some of you hope. So those of you out there who are going through situations like Anne, where it feels literally like your entire life is falling apart and who you were before is no longer an option. Like you're going to be someone different. But what I love about this is that it really was, it's not just like a nice thing to say, oh, you're being reborn and you're going to have, things are going to be even better. It's, you actually got to experience that whole transformation and transition.
Yeah. And whenever a planet's, particularly like the big guys, Saturn comes across. So at one point in the 2.5 years in John's living room, he looked at me and he goes, so what was it like Saturn came across into your ascendant, Anne? I said, it's like a train ran into my living room, do you feel that way? And in the same way, when we're born, it's like a big event, it was literally being born again. And we don't really talk in our culture that there's seasons of life, there's cycles of life that have, ups and downs and ins and outs. We always think, oh, climb. And that's not really how it works. We look at nature, we see seasons. We have seasons in our life. So that was a season for endings, and rebirth to a new job, really. And I worked with, we met at work. And yeah. And then I worked with him in my computer business when we broke up. So yeah, it was a big deal.
Yeah, it makes it even, if there's more tendrils, like your work, everything was disrupted. Yeah. Well, so speaking of Saturn, I mean, we obviously have a big Saturn year coming, right? If when we're having a huge Saturn personal transit, it feels like a train drives into our living room. Let me just back up for one sec for those who are like, what is she even talking about? I'm talking about 2020 and the big Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn in January, but there's more to the year, right? It's not just like January.
Oh, the whole year is huge. Yeah, it's a huge year. So it's a year to really work. So the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, you go back to when it met in 82, fall of 82, and then it met 36 years before that in 47. So it happens very rarely, the Lord of the Underworld meeting the Lord of Karma. But it's also the planet of transformation and relationships, right? Because Pluto is a lot about our what we're most intensely obsessed with. And Saturn is the structure we're supposed to work with. So in 47, the guys all came home from the war and started the baby boomers because that one was in Leo. And in 82, it was around relationships because it was in Libra. And that was Reaganomics. We're going to trickle down, we're going to buy everything and trickle it down and break the unions. Now, in Capricorn, it's the merger of business, banks, and government and how that works. So there's a lot of energy with this around how do we work with that going forward. Then the other piece of it is the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. You go back, if you're old enough, go back to 82, 83 and what was going on then, because that speaks to a cycle you began. So in my case, we were talking a little bit before we started, that was when my mother died. And she said to me, take care of your father. He's not as tough as he looks. So I'm like, okay. So now 36 years later, my dad dies and I'm like, the cycle's done. So I did my karmic work, one of my karmic jobs in this life. So I'm finishing that up. We'll probably have the estate probated by January. I have an opportunity to buy the condo that he and my mother bought in 79, which would be a whole different life if I bought a place in Florida. So, it's like we're all restructuring our life for the next 36 years. And then next year also has 3 Jupiter-Pluto unions, which happens every 13 years. So Jupiter, the planet of expansion and abundance, is with the Lord of the Underworld. So it gets a little darker, but in the last time we had that was 2007 when Bernie Madoff went down and Lehman Brothers collapsed. So that's why a lot of astrologers and economists are forecasting financial stuff. And then in December of next year, we have Saturn and Jupiter meeting at 0 Aquarius. And they meet every 20 years. So that was in 2000, 80, 60, 40. And that's the great cycle that Tecumseh talked about, where every 20 years the leader dies in office. So when people go to me, who do you think's going to win? I said, I don't care. Look at the vice president, because whoever gets elected then isn't going to make it, right? They're going to be the
Whoa. I mean, you're that certain. Like you think that whoever is the president when we hit December of 2020.
That's the next election.
Right.
That president elected in that 4 years will die in office. So go back in history. Al Gore got hung by Chads in Florida by the Bush brothers. 1980, Reagan got shot, but he did have an astrologer, right? And John Lennon died. 60 was Kennedy. 40 was Roosevelt, back McKinley, back all the way to Lincoln. Every 20 years, the Jupiter-Saturn meets, and it says, the king is dead, here's the new king. Remember, because Saturn is the father of Jupiter. So it's a big time of leadership change. and people changing the leaders. And it's going to be in Aquarius, which is also what's called a great cycle completing. It's been in Earth these last many years, and now it's going into Aquarius for the next chunk. And I should know the number, but I don't. But it's a long cycle. So it's called the Tecumseh curse. But basically, the mundane astrologers have studied it for years as a great cycle where leaders are born and die and leave because they transition in that. So we see a lot of people changing their lives and the structures of their lives through this next year about what their new direction is.
Well, and would the quote unquote, the king is dead. I mean, I understand, like, at a collective level, if you're in the United States, the king is the president. Does that also trickle down into like our individual lives? And
yes.
Okay. Whoa.
Think back to 80, think back to 2000, think about the structures that changed or expanded in your life. Think back, if you're old enough, to 60, think back to 40, because it was a structural change in our understanding of how the world worked and what the rules were, right? Because Saturn is the father of Jupiter. So it's the king is dead, then there's a new king taking over. So you remember that scene in The King and I, after the king dies and the son stands up and goes, I am the king now, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do whatever. So we've this huge year of change ahead of us while we each decide in our own lives what our kingdom is and where we're going with it and what it looks like,
Oh my gosh. Wow. In 2000, I graduated from college. So with that, I mean, that's kind of like, would you say that what happened in those years that you just pinpointed, so like 2000, 80, 60, 40, that it's a similar theme, like whatever was happening?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It was the cycle of the structure in your life and how it relates and expands. So Jupiter and Saturn are generational planets, right? So Saturn's every 2.5 years, Jupiter's every year. So you know how in school there's the class that's good, and then there's the class that's bad, and then there's the wild class? That's because every year the Jupiter changes. And then every 2.5 years, if you think of the kids like 2.5 years older, you don't play with the kids 2.5 years younger than you. They're too young when you get older. But so it's the structural group that you came in with. So you go through a major generational change around the structure, Saturn, the authorities, and Jupiter, your relationship to them. Because Jupiter is the good parent or the nice relationship, the easy relationship. And Saturn is a little more of the where you have to do the work or you're dedicated to the process. So when the two of them get together, they say, okay, what's the structure you're going to grow and create over the next 20 years? So if you look at the structure you created, and then go back and look at when Jupiter squared Saturn as he went around, you'll find those were major turning points in your life. And it's a 20-year cycle, so it's pretty easy to figure out when those turning points were, because it's every 5 years.
Wow. Okay. And you said something earlier. I want to go back. You said something about business, banks, and government like merging or something. There was a word you used, and I'd love for you to expand on that.
Well, because Capricorn is the sign of businesses. It's also the sign of government. It's also the sign of banks and power. So as Saturn and Pluto meet up, they are asking us to look at our relationship to the structures that we have around power, business, and banking. So when we go back to 82, when Saturn and Pluto met up before, Reagan said, hey, why don't we privatize everything we've built over the last 36 years and it'll trickle down. So we did that, which is great. But now we're looking and we're going, hey, structures aren't really working for us the way we want them to be. So that's the Saturn-Pluto cycle. And that is, when it was fighting was in 2001. So it's the World Trade Center attack, right? And then in 94, we had the opening square, and that was the first World Trade Center attack. So we've seen it as a structural relationship to the outside world. And now we're kind of going a little more interior, like who do we want to play with in the world? Or Capricorn, do we want to go alone? Or how are we going to do it? So there's a whole dialogue going on in the collective, but also in our own lives about that relationship. And then the Jupiter Pluto conjunction, which happened in 97, was when Bernie Madoff ran off with all the money. And then it went into Capricorn. And that was when Lehman Brothers collapsed because basically, I don't remember which bank it was, they pulled their money because they knew Lehman was teetering, and they pulled their money out and they basically forced it into bankruptcy. And that was the beginning of the Great Recession, which technically we're, coming out of, but we're going into, well, what is the structures we're going to work with and how are we going to work with them? And then, just a bigger cycle, Pluto, we have in our Pluto return, not yet, but till 26. So this is kind of all the lead up to that, when the nation was founded, So when Nancy Pelosi starts quoting Ben Franklin, you have a republic if you can keep it. we're back at the time when we were figuring out what that structure was supposed to be relative to a kingdom or a republic where everybody votes. So we're at a structural realignment. Now, the good news is people go, oh my God. I'm like, no, Italy had it. Egypt's had it, England had it, we left them. Now they're trying to leave Brexit. So it's a structural realignment of everybody. And if you think back to Saturn-Pluto, when it met in 47, that's when everybody said, hey, let's all band together and take care of each other. And now we're going, hell with that shit. We're pulling out of, our relationships to the world, the union that we formed in 47, that we said we're going to band together. So it's very big. And there's a great book by a guy named Richard Tarnas called Cosmos and Psyche. And he talks about what these are what are called great cycles. And of course, astrologers initially, we got our deal with mundane, where we would say to the king, good day to have a war. There's going to be a drought next year. You better be a little careful. The people will be rioting. So there's great cycles that we look at and study. And he's a Harvard guy who is also like a therapist and a really brilliant astrologer. And he wrote this book on the bigger cycles. So it makes you not worry because other countries have gone through it. People live through it. We've just never gone through it. So we're learning how to deal with this structural stuff. This is a really big time for us.
And when you say structural stuff, we're basically saying the structures that we have are no longer really working for us. So they need to kind of break down to a certain extent so that something new can come through, right?
Think home renovation, right?
Home renovation. Okay. So
not as bad as the World Trade Center, which was a big fight where the buildings collapsed, right? Because that was an opposition. This is a marriage.
This is a marriage.
They're getting married and they're saying, what?
Who's getting married?
Saturn and Pluto, because they're meeting up.
Okay.
Yeah, they're meeting up at 22 and they're saying, let's get married. And we're like, wow, what are you going to do when you get married, guys? Last time we saw you, you were blowing each other up, blowing up Lower Manhattan, right? It might be a little bit of a scary marriage, but it also is, it happens every 36 years. So it says to us, what's the structure? And of course, Earth, Capricorn's Earth. So it's all the climate change stuff. And, what are the government structures that we're going to put in to work with us? What do we want the next big cycle?
Yeah. So in order to make this something in our lives that we can look back on and say, maybe it was a little uncomfortable at moments, but it kind of needed to happen, kind of like what happened in your life, right? What kinds of things can we be thinking, or how can we be preparing ourselves, preparing for this level of change, essentially, now?
I think what helps is if people look at it and say, because a lot of times the beauty of astrology is we go through it even if we don't know we're going through it. So right. When I went back and I found astrology back when I was having that aspect in 94, when Saturn and Pluto were squaring each other, right, in my personal relationship, and finding astrology, look back at what happened at those times and see what was seeded. And if you're young, see what was going on with your parents, because they're the authorities, or what was going on in the structure of your life. And so we always go back to what our natal Pluto and our natal Saturn are asking of us, right? Because those two guys are meeting up and getting married. So if your natal Saturn and Pluto like each other, no problem. It's a happy marriage. If your natal Saturn and Pluto argue a bit, you're probably going to experience this a little more contentious. But the goal of it is similar to when you buy a house and you go, okay, I'm going to move in, I'm going to renovate the kitchen. And then you start taking the walls down, you go, oh my God, what's back there? Pluto is a renovation aspect. So it's not always easy because it renovates, but it renovates the existing structure. The point is you have the land and you got a house on it. And now what are you going to do with that structure for the next 36 years of your life or subset thereof? I look at it as take responsibilities. You do the planet words. Saturn says take responsibility, do the work. Pluto says prepare for transformation. It's going to be different than it was before. Your life is going to be Pluto transits permanently alter your life. They don't generally tend to kill you. They tend to transform you, right? Saturn tends to be like, okay, you're done here, boom. But Pluto's like, well, let's renovate this. And he usually goes after something that you're not particularly, you think you're good at it. And he's like, oh yeah, come here, let me talk to you, kid. Right. So I kind of think of him as the mob, in a way, because he's kind of like, yeah, can I ask a favor of you? I got a favor to ask. Right. And you go, a favor, huh? And he goes, yeah, a favor, and you're kind of like, all right, what do I, but Saturn is much more clear cut. He's pretty straightforward. He's got the vision. He's got the structure of our lives. So On a positive note, infrastructure reform. On a positive note, renovating the financial structures. On a positive note, getting our stuff together with climate change and saying, we need to understand the physical changes going on in the world and the impact they're going to have on us, because it's going to be permanent. Because Pluto is a permanent change. When I had him on my moon, I had a really nice view with a lot of sunshine. I could lay in bed and see my moon at night when it rose up. And then they built a building across the street from me. So I still have a nice apartment, but I don't have the sunshine anymore to grow tomatoes on my fire escape, right? So it's kind of an interesting, it's an interesting journey that we're on. And really, what people need to know is, your chart when you were 5 years old, if your mother had brought you for a reading, the astrologer would have said, well, when it gets to 2020, they're going to have a really big change in this area of their life. And it's going to restructure their life for the next 36 years.
And where it's going to have a change in people's lives is where their Saturn and their Pluto are in the chart?
Natally, because now they're coming together and getting married at 22 Capricorn. So you look at what's at 22 Capricorn, and then you say, okay, what do you have at that degree? Because Jupiter and Neptune are on that degree 3 times next year too. And then when it finishes, when December comes, we go, okay, the renovation is done. Now we're in the air, and now let's go fly, because they're in air signs.
And what orb would you use for that?
We use about a 3-degree orb.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it's a biggie. It's never, nobody's going to miss it. It's because most people have 20 somewhere in their chart too. But when we're looking at a natal transit, we always go back to the natal position of the planet to see what you came in to learn about that planet. So in my case, I have Saturn in Scorpio. So I was having my Saturn return back then. So Saturn in Scorpio is I'm here to learn about death, right? It's in the 8th house. And it's Pluto in Leo, in my case, in the 7th house. So it's my relationships to the outside world. But it's also my parents' marriage, because the 7th house is my parents' marriage. So now there's a new wife that comes in. And so I go on this journey with my dad and the new wife and me, right? And of course, deathbed promises, hard to bail on. So every time I went, I promised, I went back in, right? So it's one of those things you want to kind of look at and say, what did I actually commit to here? What am I and that's really the most important. And also to remember that you don't have to commit to things, but there is a karmic call because it's Saturn. So you're going to feel like you have to. And so then you want to feel like, okay, how do I want to work with this so that it works for me in a way that's helpful and that I can understand this is part of my path. But at the same time, the story that began in 82 is finishing. So we're being set free from that. So what did you have in 82? Because in 80, you graduated, or 2000, you graduated.
Well, 82, I was only 4. So I can't actually.
What were your parents doing?
It's a really good question. I feel like I need to ask them because I don't really know.
Okay, yeah. Because they form some kind of commitment. And look in your chart back where the degree of 28 Libra is, right? And what 28 Libra invites us to do, what invites you to do.
Fascinating. Okay. Well, Anne, I'm so excited that you are the one who is actually going to be kicking off our year in the inner circle. So we're going to be with you during that really amazing, intense January time. So January to February.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah.
It's huge. And I also know you're going to be teaching a mastery class for all of the inner circle members on Jupiter. So tell us why you're choosing Jupiter and tell us a little bit about that mastery class training.
Okay, well, Jupiter is hanging out with Saturn and Pluto, right, all year long. So we're basically kind of think of the 3 of them as biker dudes, right? So Saturn is the father and Jupiter and Pluto as the kids. And Saturn ate Pluto, right, because he'd killed his father off. And he heard that his kids were going to kill him off. So he ate his kids. And then Jupiter came along and the mother was tired of him killing off his kids. So she wrapped a stone up and gave it to Saturn. He ate the stone and she gave the baby away to get raised by somebody else. And he returns and he comes back and he punches Saturn in the stomach. Up vomits the other siblings that Pluto had eaten, or Saturn had eaten, including Pluto, covered in vomit. And then they go to war with Saturn and Pluto. So there's a whole energy of the strife, but I always kind of think of Capricorn, as kind of like biker dudes, on some level. Like think of the 3 big guys in Capricorn. They're kind of sitting around in a room. There's a play on Broadway called Hamilton, and it's like, I want to be behind those closed doors. What's going on behind those closed doors? So the 3 of them are basically negotiating all year. Now, of the 3 of them, Jupiter's the nicest. So I'm going to teach you how to work with your Jupiter, where you are in your Jupiter life cycle, because Jupiter has cycles that he does, and teach you what Jupiter is going to be working with you on, so you know how to go work with him to maybe make the other ones, he'll be the one that comes in and goes, hey, everybody want a beer? While Saturn and Pluto are sitting there staring at each other, right? So he'll be like, hey, want a beer? Hey, guys, want to go out for a walk? And they're going to be like, because it's a lot of energy around the restructuring of everything. So it's our understanding of what's the purpose and why are we here. So we're going to talk about the easier one. And Jupiter has 3 meetings with Pluto next year. So he's a really busy guy because he meets up with Saturn, he meets up with Pluto 3 times, and then at the end of the year, he meets up with Saturn to start 20 years. So the brothers go off. And have this dynamic all year long, talking about their dad, working out their stuff. And then Jupiter and Saturn meet up in December to say, okay, this is our vision next. So it's a very big, and if you've ever done a house renovation, they can run for a long time. This week we're down in Florida. My dad's got a condo here. He's passed now, but so one of the women was here. My sister's best friend came from Rochester. So we were talking about when we had the kitchen renovated when I was a kid, and the kitchen renovator guy, and my mother just being beside herself because the kitchen renovator guy gave her a really hard time, right? And apparently, the friend Molly knew some of the stories of the kitchen, like from other people, because she used to walk her dog with his wife, right? So it was interesting to kind of hear it. Oh, he gave other people trouble too, right? Which I never knew. I just knew my mother had trouble with him. So it gives us, Jupiter always encourages us to look around and see who our collaborators are and how to work with them productively, because he's the nice planet, but he's hanging out with the mean guys right now. Because Jupiter's a benefic, but Saturn and Pluto are definitely malefics. So he's going in and he's trying to, make them work a little better, So teaching us how to work with that positively and understand what to do with it, I think will help make the year a little easier.
For sure. So, Anne, I know also as we go throughout our life, we're in different Jupiter cycles. So can you tell us a little bit about what those Jupiter cycles are and why knowing which Jupiter cycle you're in can help you?
So Jupiter in your natal chart is born someplace. And if you think about the grades of school you're in, the nice kids, the mean kids, the wild class, especially if you're a teacher, you totally resonate with that. But the first 12 years of Jupiter is ruled by the moon, which is, and it's what we call Chaldean order, which is the order of the planets and their speed, but also kind of their importance to us. So the moon runs from age 0 to 12, and people work on their moon energies and learning their family, their tribe, their home. Mercury, 12 to 24, we learn to trade, our friends become important, our siblings, we go out in the world, but we're babies. 24 to 36, we run our Venus Jupiter chapter, which is we fall in love, we figure out what we want, we learn how to make money, all Venus things. And then halfway through there, we get to our Saturn return where we go, oh, don't want that Venus, want this Venus. And so we figure it out. And then when we hit 36, we go, oh, I know what I like emotionally. I know what makes me think what I think about things, and I know what I love. So now let me go live my life. And so that sun runs from 36 to 48, and then 48 to 60, you've hopefully gotten it together. Your Mars takes over, and he's like, okay, let's go. We got everybody in sync. And then you hit 60 to 72, you're running your Jupiter, retiring. What did you amount to? What did you create? And then 72 to 84, we hang out with Saturn, reflecting on what we've done in our lives. So depending on, because Jupiter's so important next year, we're going to talk about that cycle, and people can understand how, because it's going to play with that other planet too. It's going to pull that other planet in, where they are in the story that's important for them, because Jupiter, if they're 24 to 36, they're going to be working on Venus issues. I'm going to be working on Jupiter issues because I'm between 60 and 72. So I already know what's happening. I'm seeing it. I'm buying a condo. I'm figuring out the structure of my life. I'm going to work in Florida, work in New York. Like, really? Or I'm not going to buy the condo. I'm going to live in New York. It's that kind of life structure decisions about how you deploy your energy, So
wow, very nice.
Yeah, it's a big deal. So we're going to go through it so everybody can understand where they are, look at their charts, and then understand what Jupiter's doing in general, because he's in Capricorn, which means he's answering to Saturn in Capricorn, which makes him a little harder until the end of the year when he gets into the air and he goes, now you understand why I did it. So when you watch like movie stars train for a movie and they go and they exercise and they do G.I. Jane or G.I. Joe, That's kind of what next year is going to be like. So, in teaching you how to work with a personal trainer that's kicking your butt because he's getting you aligned for the next big chapter. If you know that, then you know how to work with the energy productively. And that's why I fell in love with astrology, was like, if you could have told me this was going to happen and it happened 7 years ago and you knew about it and now you're telling me. So it's like informed always makes better choices,
Absolutely. That level of awareness and even if we still make the choices that feel uncomfortable, at least we have that bird's eye view that there is something's happening and it's working and it's going towards something versus it just feels like a chaotic mess and everything's falling apart.
Right. Well, it's like when you renovate the house and you pull the wall down and you kind of look and you go, what did I think? Well, but you have the architecture's vision. You had the picture in the magazine that inspired you. It's in there. You just have to go kind of pull it out and find it,
Exactly. Well, and that can keep pulling you forward. It helps you show up every day when you know that there's something at the end of it that is going to look really beautiful. Right now, it looks like a mess. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it will look like a mess because it's World Trade Center getting married.
Yeah.
Well, I think about what it looked like when they blew up, right? So we're all going to have, kind of a collective experience similar to that, on some level of our life in that house that's got 22 in it.
Wow.
Well, it's big. And I think it's really, I always say to people when they start moaning about stuff, I moan too. I'm not going to say I don't. But I always go, hey, you picked to incarnate now. So you have a job to do. You're part of the plan. You're part of the chorus. You have a reason to be here and a reason to speak.
I love that.
Know that, then you kind of go, all right, I have a reason to be here. I have a reason to speak. This is what I'm supposed to do. I'm on it.
Very good. Well, Anne, it is going to be such a pleasure to go on this journey with literally kicking off the new year with you as our guide. And then really getting to dive into Jupiter, which is huge for us the whole year long. So everybody will have such a more intimate experience of what Jupiter's doing in their chart, but also in that bigger context of their life. And yeah, to me, I look at 2020, I'm like, okay, well, let's just do it together because we're all in it. There's no one that's like outside of what's going to be happening. So we'll do it together and we'll stay as informed and aware as we can and work with it the best way we can.
Yeah. And understand that what happens when they get married is there is an opportunity for people to come together. Like when you go to a marriage or you go to a funeral, you go to one of those things, there's an opportunity for reunion and reignition. So I'm also kind of hoping it'll help the country heal a little bit because we're all going to say, like, what's our common vision of what we want? Because back when we had this, back 250 years ago, the founding fathers said, hey, what's our vision of our country? And Ben Franklin, you have a republic if you can keep it. And so now we have to think about, well, what is it we want? What is the structure of our lives going to look like? What's our vision for where we're going? How do we want to get there? What do we really believe is important? And the nice part or the bad part, you can look at it both ways. Saturn is the structures. He's the bones in our body. He's our teeth in our head. He's our skin that contains our flesh. And so without Saturn, we'd be a puddle of muscles on the floor, squirreling along like a little snail. Because of Saturn, we walk upright and he's the shoulder guy. Saturn words are shoulds because he's what we shoulder and what we carry forward, but also he's the structure that sustains and supports us. And so it's really important to understand your structures that you're committing to. And natally, if you understand your natal Saturn by sign and placement, you can really get a real understanding of, oh, that's my path in the world. That's what I'm supposed to do. And that'll help a lot because you're going to really come up with a new assignment this next year.
Very nice.
The big guys are talking to you. So you want to be listening because if you're not, you're like, what did I miss?
Wow. And very nice. Thank you so much for being here on the show today. It's going to be a pleasure to be with you both for the Forecast event in January and then kicking off the year for the Inner Circle. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I look forward to it. And all the Astro Hub people, Astrology Hub people, I call it Astro Hub in my head, all the Astrology Hub people that are kind of learning. And you guys have to remember, you're really helping make the world a better place. Because whenever somebody comes over to you and goes, so like, what's going on? Is there like, what's going on in this? Because they know you know about astrology. So they ask you kind of, even if they don't believe. And you go, yeah, we're supposed to shoulder and do our work and, nose to the grindstone and really have a vision in addition to just doing the work. So that's big.
It's very big. Wow. I love that. We can end on that message. Anne, thank you so much. And we'll get to connect with you again here really soon.
January. We're woohoo.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Anne. Aloha.
Bye. Bye, Astrology Hub people.
Thank you so much for joining Ann and me today. I hope you gained some insight that will help you move forward into 2020 more informed and empowered. And if you'd like more of Ann and other top astrologers live and virtual to kick off 2020, then go ahead and grab your free spot for the upcoming 2020 Astrology Forecast Marathon at astrologyhub.com/2020forecast. Join us next week for our very own Stormy Grace, who's going to share not only why she thinks 2020 is such an exciting year astrologically, but why it's really setting the stage for 2021. More fun on its way, you guys. Stormy is going to give you actionable tips to close out this decade and start the new one out in highest alignment with the stars that are working right now to move you into your greatest potential. Don't forget to join Stormy, Ann, myself, and many others at the Forecast Fest. Again, that link to get your free spot is astrologyhub.com/2020forecast. Thank you so much for tuning into the show today, for being a part of our community, and as always, for making astrology a part of your life. I'll catch you on the next episode. You guys, I am so excited. I've been waiting for this for months. It is with pleasure that I officially invite you to our free 5th annual Global 2020 Astrology Forecast Marathon event. Registration is now open. The event is taking place online January 9th through 12th, and it is going to be epic. Just go to astrologyhub.com/2020forecast to reserve your free seat today. We're featuring 12 of your favorite astrologers, including Kai Pacha, Christopher Renstrom, Stormy Grace, Ann Ortelee, Gemini Brett, Jennifer Rassiopi, just to name a few. I'll be broadcasting live with these astrological powerhouses for 5 hours per day, walking through every month of the year and making sure you know about key dates, important transits, and how the energies may interact with global situations like the health of our planet and financial and political institutions, and the types of energies you may see playing out in your personal life, in your career, your health, and your relationships. Our previous attendees have called this event an astrological smorgasbord, and they rave about it every year. If you're curious about 2020, what the big shift in energy could mean for our world and your life, and if you're ready to consciously co-create with the cosmic energies, then this is the event for you. Just go to astrologyhub.com/2020forecast and reserve your seat now. And even if you can't join us for the whole live event, tuning in for 20 or 30 minutes whenever you can is going to make a huge difference for you as we embark upon this new decade. We will only send the replay of this event to those who register, so make sure you register so you can have access to the limited time recordings. I am so excited to share this event with you so we can enter into this next decade in style together. Just go to astrologyhub.com/2020forecast and reserve your free spot today.
Hi, this is Chris Kaplan, the producer of the Astrology Hub podcast. This episode is over, but check the show notes for links to products and services you've heard about during this episode. And if you enjoyed our show, please subscribe and rate using the subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcasts.